The widow stood in front of the general store mirror, her trembling fingers wrapped around the thick auburn braid that had taken 20 years to grow, and knew that by sunset her last possession of beauty would be sold to keep her children from starving another week. Adelaide Vaughn had never imagined her life would come to this moment in the spring of 1882, standing in the dusty heat of Val Verde, Texas, preparing to part with the one thing her late husband had loved most about her appearance. The mirror showed a woman of 27 years who looked a decade older, with hollow cheeks and shadows beneath green eyes that had once sparkled with hope. Her calico dress, mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches, hung loose on a frame that had grown thin from giving her children the larger portions of their meager meals. "Mrs. Vaughn, are you certain about this?" The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, shifted uncomfortably behind his counter. He was a portly man with kind eyes who had extended her credit far beyond what his business could reasonably sustain. "There might be other ways. There are no other ways left." Adelaide's voice came out steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I have asked everyone in town for work. No one needs a seamstress when they can barely afford food for their own families. No one wants a washerwoman when the creek is running low. My children need to eat, Mr. Henderson. Tommy is only 6, and little Sarah just turned 4. They cannot go hungry another day." The bell above the shop door chimed, and Adelaide quickly turned away from the mirror, not wanting anyone to witness her shame. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor, and she caught the scent of leather and sage, the smell of a man who spent his days in the open range. "Henderson, I need supplies for the next 2 weeks. The usual order." The voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot, but there was something gentle beneath the harsh exterior. "Mr. Nash, of course. I will get that ready for you right away." Adelaide kept her back turned, her hands working to untie the ribbon that held her braid. She had met Samuel Nash only twice since arriving in Val Verde 3 years ago with her husband Robert. The rancher lived alone on a spread 5 miles north of town, a man in his early 30s who kept to himself and spoke little when he came to town for supplies. People said he had come to Texas after the war, looking to forget whatever horrors he had witnessed, and that he preferred the company of cattle and horses to people. "Madam, are you all right?" The question surprised her, and she turned to find Samuel Nash standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. Dark brown hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, held genuine concern. "I am fine, thank you." Adelaide tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Just conducting some business with Mr. Henderson." Samuel's gaze moved to the scissors in Henderson's hand, then to the long braid Adelaide had pulled over her shoulder, and understanding dawned across his weathered features. His jaw tightened, and something flickered in those blue eyes, something that might have been anger or sorrow, she could not tell which. "How much?" Samuel asked, his voice quiet but firm. "I beg your pardon." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. "How much is Henderson paying you for your hair?" The shopkeeper cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Nash, this is really not your concern. I asked the lady a question." Samuel's eyes never left Adelaide's face, and she found herself unable to look away from the intensity of his gaze. $5, she whispered. "It is enough for flour, beans, and salt pork to last us 2 weeks if we are careful." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, and Adelaide watched emotions play across his face like clouds moving across the sky. Finally, he turned to Henderson. "Add 2 months' worth of supplies to my order. Flour, sugar, Coffee, beans, rice, salt pork, bacon, fresh vegetables, canned goods, whatever a family with 2 small children would need. Make it generous. Mr. Nash, I do not understand, Henderson said, but he was already moving to gather the items. And add fabric, the good kind, enough for dresses for the lady and her children. Shoes, too, if you have them in the right sizes. Samuel reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. Mrs. Vaughn, how old are your children? Adelaide felt the room spinning. Sir, I cannot accept charity. I have my pride, and I will not be anyone's burden. It is not charity. Samuel's voice remained steady, calm. I am making you a business proposition. My ranch is large, too large for one man to manage properly. The house is in desperate need of a woman's touch. I need someone to cook proper meals, keep the house clean, tend the vegetable garden, preserve food for winter, and handle the dozens of other tasks that keep a ranch running. In exchange, you and your children would have a home, food, and security. You would earn your keep through honest work. You want to hire me as your housekeeper. Adelaide tried to understand what was happening. This morning she had been preparing to sell her hair, and now this stranger was offering her a lifeline. More than that, a ranch partner of sorts. Someone who would manage the household while I manage the land and cattle. Your children would have space to grow, fresh air, and plenty to eat. There is a small schoolhouse about 2 miles from my property where they could get proper education when the teacher comes through. Samuel's blue eyes softened. I am not trying to insult you, Mrs. Vaughn. I am offering you honest work for honest pay along with room and board. Nothing more, nothing less. Adelaide's mind raced. She thought of the tiny room she and her children currently occupied above the boarding house, paid for by what little money she earned doing odd jobs. She thought of Tommy's hollow cheeks and the way Sarah cried at night from hunger. She thought of her husband Robert, dead these past 8 months from a fever that had swept through town, and how he would want his children cared for, protected, given a chance at life. Why would you do this for strangers? She asked, her voice barely audible. Samuel's expression grew distant, as if he were looking at something far away that only he could see. Because once, a long time ago, someone showed me kindness when I had nothing. They gave me a chance to build a life when I thought everything was lost. I have been blessed with good land and prosperity, more than one man needs. It seems right to pass that kindness along. Mr. Henderson had stopped gathering supplies and was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Adelaide knew that by tomorrow morning, the entire town would be talking about this conversation. People would whisper and speculate about the lonely rancher and the desperate widow. But as she looked into Samuel Nash's eyes, she saw only honest sincerity and something else, something that looked like loneliness to match her own. I would need to bring my children to see the ranch first, Adelaide said slowly, and we would need to establish clear boundaries and expectations. I will work hard, Mr. Nash, harder than you can imagine, but I must ensure my children's safety and well-being above all else. I would expect nothing less from a good mother. Samuel's lips curved into a small smile, the first she had seen from him. The ranch is called the Silver Creek Ranch, named for the stream that runs through the property. There is a main house with 4 bedrooms, a separate bunkhouse that currently sits empty, and all the outbuildings needed for a working ranch. You and your children would have your own rooms in the main house, with locks on the doors if that would make you feel more secure. I give you my word as a gentleman that you would be treated with nothing but respect. Adelaide felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. When would you want us to start? How about we load these supplies into my wagon, and I take you and your children out to see the place this afternoon? If you like what you see, you can move in tomorrow. If not, these supplies are yours regardless. no strings attached. Samuel turned to Henderson. "Get everything packed up. I will settle the bill." "But my hair," Adelaide said, her hand moving unconsciously to her braid. "Keep it." Samuel's voice was firm. "A woman's hair is her crown, or so my mother used to say. Your children should not have to watch their mother sacrifice something so precious just to keep them fed. Not when there is another way." As Mr. Henderson bustled about gathering supplies, Adelaide found herself watching Samuel Nash with new eyes. He moved with quiet confidence, helping to load sacks of flour and beans into crates, his movements efficient and practiced. He asked Henderson about her children's sizes for the shoes and clothes, making notes on a slip of paper with careful attention to detail. When their eyes met across the shop, Adelaide felt something shift in her chest, a tiny flutter of hope that perhaps her life was not over, that perhaps there might be a future beyond mere survival. An hour later, Adelaide walked back to the boarding house with Samuel beside her, his wagon loaded with more food than she had seen in months. The townspeople they passed stared openly, and Adelaide held her head high despite the blush burning her cheeks. Let them talk. Her children would eat tonight, and that was all that mattered. Tommy and Sarah were in their room, playing quietly with a set of wooden blocks that had been Robert's as a child. They looked up when Adelaide entered, and she saw the question in Tommy's eyes, the worry that came from a boy who had grown up too fast in the past 8 months. "Children, this is Mr. Nash. He owns a ranch outside of town, and he has offered us all jobs there. We are going to visit this afternoon to see if it might be a good place for us to live and work." Sarah, ever the bold one despite her tender age, walked right up to Samuel and stared up at him with curious brown eyes. "Are you a real cowboy?" Samuel crouched down to her level, his large frame folding with surprising grace. "I suppose I am. I raise cattle and horses, ride the range every day, and sleep under the stars more often than not. Does that count? You have a horse I could pet." Sarah's eyes grew wide with excitement. "I have several horses, and one of them is a gentle mare that loves children. Her name is Rosie, and she has a coat the color of copper pennies." Samuel's smile was genuine, and Adelaide felt her heart soften watching this tough rancher speak so gently to her daughter. Tommy remained cautious, staying close to his mother's side. "My pa died," he said suddenly, his voice challenging. "He got sick and the doctor could not help him. Mama says we have to be strong now." "Your mother is right." Samuel stood but kept his voice gentle. "Being strong is important. So is knowing when to accept help from others. There is no shame in working hard for what you need, and there is no shame in letting people help you get back on your feet." "Are you going to be our new pa?" Sarah asked with the blunt innocence of a 4-year-old. "Sarah." Adelaide gasped, mortified, but Samuel just shook his head gently. "No, little one. Your pa will always be your pa, and no one can replace him. I am just a man offering your mother honest work and a safe place for your family to live. Nothing more." The words should have been reassuring, but Adelaide found herself feeling a strange pang of disappointment. She pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to exhaustion and stress. Samuel Nash was being extraordinarily kind, offering them a chance at stability and security. She could not afford to complicate that with foolish romantic notions. The ride out to the Silver Creek Ranch took just under an hour, with Tommy and Sarah bouncing excitedly in the back of the wagon while Adelaide sat on the bench seat beside Samuel. He handled the horses with easy competence, and she found herself stealing glances at his profile, at the strong line of his jaw, and the way the afternoon sun brought out hints of gold in his dark hair. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about this man who was changing her life. 8 years now. I bought the land with my savings from working on other ranches after the war. Started with just 50 acres and 100 head of cattle. Now I have 500 acres and nearly 400 head, plus horses for breeding and sale. Pride colored his voice, the pride of a man who had built something from nothing. It has been good land to me. The creek never runs dry, even in the worst summers, and the grass grows thick enough to support the herds without too much supplemental feeding. You run the ranch entirely alone. Adelaide could not imagine the amount of work that would require. I hire hands during roundup and branding season, usually men from town who want temporary work. The rest of the year I manage on my own. It keeps me busy, but I like it that way. He paused, then added quietly, or I thought I did. Lately, the house has felt emptier than it used to. A man can only talk to horses for so long before he starts to feel the lack of human conversation. Adelaide wanted to ask why he had never married, why a prosperous rancher in his early 30s remained alone, but the questions felt too personal for their fragile acquaintance. Instead, she asked about the land, the cattle, the daily rhythms of ranch life, and Samuel answered each question with patience and detail. When the ranch came into view, Adelaide caught her breath. The house was larger than she had expected. A solid 2-story structure built from good timber with a wraparound porch that would provide shade during the brutal Texas summers. Corrals and outbuildings were well maintained, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. The creek Samuel had mentioned ran alongside the property, its water glinting silver in the afternoon light. "It is beautiful," Adelaide whispered. "It is home." Samuel brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Or at least, it could be. The inside of the house confirmed what Samuel had said about needing a woman's touch. The furniture was solid and functional but sparse, and dust covered nearly every surface. The kitchen was well equipped with a large cast iron stove, but dirty dishes were piled in the sink, and the floor needed a good scrubbing. Still, the bones of the house were good, with large windows that let in plenty of light and solid construction that would keep them warm in winter and cool in summer. "The bedrooms are upstairs," Samuel said, leading the way. "You would have the largest room, and the children could share the one next door, or they could each have their own if you prefer. My room is at the other end of the hall." The rooms were indeed spacious, with real beds and dressers, luxuries Adelaide had not enjoyed in months. Sarah immediately claimed the room with windows facing east, declaring she wanted to wake up with the sunrise. Tommy was more reserved, but she could see excitement building behind his careful exterior. "What do you think?" Samuel asked as they stood on the porch, watching the children explore the yard under the watchful eye of a friendly cattle dog who had appeared from the barn. "I think my children deserve a chance at this life." Adelaide turned to face him fully. "I will work harder than you have ever seen anyone work, Mr. Nash. I will earn our keep and then some. You will not regret this decision. Call me Samuel, please, and I already know I will not regret it." His blue eyes held hers, and Adelaide felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. "When can you move in?" "Tomorrow, if you can spare a few hours to help us transport our belongings. Though I warn you, we do not have much. Everything we own would fit in a single trunk. Then we will make sure to fill your new home properly." Samuel smiled, and Adelaide realized how much younger he looked when he was not wearing his usual serious expression. "Tomorrow morning, I will come to the boarding house with the wagon. We will get you settled, and then I will show you around the ranch properly, introduce you to the animals, and explain the daily routines." That night, as Adelaide lay in the narrow boarding house bed with her children asleep beside her, She allowed herself to feel hope for the first time in 8 months. She thought about Samuel Nash and his quiet kindness, about the ranch that could become their home, about the future that had seemed so bleak just that morning. She knew people would talk, knew there would be speculation and gossip about the arrangement, but she could not bring herself to care. Her children would be safe, fed, and happy. That was all that mattered. Samuel returned the next morning as promised, and the move took less than an hour. Besides their clothes and a few precious mementos of Robert, Adelaide truly had nothing. Samuel had already stocked their new rooms with fresh linens, and when Adelaide opened the dresser drawers, she found new undergarments and nightclothes in her size, chosen with such discretion that she felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. The first week at the ranch passed in a blur of activity. Adelaide threw herself into her work with fierce determination, scrubbing the house from top to bottom, washing curtains and bedding, organizing the kitchen, and cooking proper meals that had Samuel looking at her with something approaching wonder. She planted seeds in the vegetable garden, mended his worn clothes, and brought order to the chaos of bachelor living. Tommy and Sarah adapted quickly, running wild in the fields during the day under Samuel's watchful supervision, helping with small chores like gathering eggs from the chicken coop and feeding the pigs. Samuel, for his part, was the perfect gentleman. He kept his distance, never entering Adelaide's room or making her feel uncomfortable in any way. He spoke to her with respect, asked her opinions on household matters, and praised her cooking until she blushed with pleasure. When he came in from the range each evening, dust-covered and exhausted, he would always stop to play with the children for a few minutes, letting Tommy ride on his shoulders or teaching Sarah the names of different horses. Adelaide found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something Sarah said, the gentleness in his hands when he helped Tommy learn to rope a fence post, the quiet competence with which he managed every aspect of the ranch. At night, she would lie awake thinking about the sound of his voice, the rare moments when their hands accidentally brushed while passing dishes at dinner, the way her heart sped up when she heard his boots on the porch at sunset. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Samuel Nash had saved her family from destitution. It was only natural that she would feel fondness toward him. But as the weeks turned into months, Adelaide could no longer deny that her feelings had grown into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. It was early June when everything changed. Adelaide was in the kitchen preparing supper, flour dusting her apron as she rolled out biscuit dough, when she heard Samuel's voice outside, low and urgent. She wiped her hands and went to the window, and her blood ran cold at what she saw. Samuel was backing toward the house, his hands raised, facing 3 rough-looking men on horseback. Even from a distance, Adelaide could tell they were trouble. Their clothes were dirty, their weapons prominent, and their horses were lathered as if they had been ridden hard. "We just need supplies and a place to rest for the night," the leader was saying, his voice carrying through the open window. "No need for trouble. There is a town 5 miles south where you can get supplies and pay for a room," Samuel replied, his voice steady but firm. "This is private property and I am asking you to leave. Asking is not going to cut it, friend." The leader's hand moved toward his gun. "We have had a long ride and we are tired. Now you are going to be hospitable or things are going to get unpleasant." Adelaide did not wait to hear more. She grabbed the rifle Samuel kept by the door, checked that it was loaded, and stepped onto the porch. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, but her hands were steady as she raised the weapon. The man said to leave. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "I suggest you listen to him. The three men turned to stare at her, and the leader's face split into an ugly grin. "Well now, looks like our friend here has himself a woman. That changes things, does it not? Leave now, or I start shooting." Adelaide's finger moved to the trigger. "I spent 8 years married to a buffalo hunter. He taught me how to shoot, and I promise you I will not miss at this range." Samuel had turned to look at her, his expression a mixture of alarm and something that might have been admiration. "Adelaide, get back inside." "No." She kept her eyes on the men. "These men need to understand that they are not welcome here." The tension stretched out, thick as molasses, and Adelaide prepared herself to follow through on her threat. But then one of the other riders, a younger man with scared eyes, touched the leader's arm. "Come on, Jake. This is not worth it. There are other places." The leader stared at Adelaide for a long moment, measuring her resolve, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him nod slowly. "Maybe you are right. But lady, you might want to be careful. A woman alone with a man who is not her husband, living in sin out here in the middle of nowhere. That kind of thing can damage a reputation permanently." They rode off, kicking up dust as they galloped away, and Adelaide stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Only then did she lower the rifle, and only then did she allow herself to shake. Samuel was beside her in an instant, gently taking the gun from her trembling hands. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." But her voice betrayed her, coming out thin and unsteady. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish." Samuel's hands moved to her shoulders, steadying her. "Those men could have killed us both. They could have hurt the children." Adelaide looked up at him, and suddenly the distance between them seemed very small. "I will not let anyone hurt my children, Samuel. Or you." Something shifted in his expression, and Adelaide saw the careful control he always maintained crack just slightly. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of scaring you away, afraid of ruining what we have built here." "What is it?" Her heart was racing again, but for a different reason now. "That man was right about one thing. People will talk about our living arrangement. Your reputation could be damaged by staying here." Samuel's hands were still on her shoulders, warm and solid. "There is one way to silence the gossip, to make sure you and the children are protected not just physically but socially as well." Adelaide could barely breathe. "What way is that?" "Marry me." The words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "Not a marriage of convenience, though we could start that way if you need time. But Adelaide, you must know by now that I have feelings for you. From that first day in the general store, watching you prepare to sacrifice your hair for your children, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. You are strong, kind, beautiful, and every day I wake up grateful that you are here. I know it has only been 2 months. I know you might still be grieving your husband, but I am asking you to consider building a real life with me, a real marriage, a real family." Adelaide stared at him, her mind spinning. She thought about Robert, about the love they had shared, and she knew he would not want her to be alone forever. She thought about how she felt when Samuel smiled at her children, when he came in from the range and sought her out first thing, when their hands touched over the dinner table. She thought about the safety and security he offered, but more than that, she thought about the way her heart sang when he was near. "I am not asking you to forget your first husband," Samuel continued, his voice gentle now. "I am just asking you to let me be your second chance. Let me give you and your children the life you deserve. Let me love you the way I have wanted to since the moment I met you. Yes." The word escaped before Adelaide could think better of it, but once it was out, she knew it was right. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as if neither of them quite believed this was happening. But then Samuel's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Adelaide melted into his embrace. The kiss deepened, becoming something fierce and passionate, and Adelaide felt 8 months of grief and loneliness finally begin to crack apart, making room for something new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy, Adelaide, I swear it. You already have." She smiled up at him, and for the first time since Robert's death, the smile reached all the way to her eyes. They were married a week later in the small church in Val Verde, with Tommy and Sarah standing beside them as witnesses. Adelaide wore a new dress of blue calico that Samuel had insisted on buying, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Sarah had helped pick that morning. The ceremony was simple, with most of the town in attendance, their curiosity finally satisfied by the public declaration of commitment. Samuel slipped a gold ring onto Adelaide's finger, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared held the promise of all the days to come. Tommy stood tall and proud, accepting his role as the man of the family alongside his new stepfather, while Sarah bounced excitedly, already calling Samuel Papa, despite Adelaide's gentle corrections. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink to celebrate. Adelaide watched Samuel interact with the guests, saw the respect they had for him, and felt pride swell in her chest. This was her husband now, this good, kind man who had given her family a second chance at life. When the last guests finally departed and the children were tucked into bed, Adelaide found herself alone with Samuel for the first time as his wife. They stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and Adelaide felt nervous anticipation flutter in her stomach. "I will not rush you," Samuel said quietly, reading her thoughts as he so often seemed to do. "We can take this as slowly as you need. Your comfort matters more to me than anything else." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who had become so precious to her in such a short time. "I am ready, Samuel. Ready to be your wife in every way, ready to build a future together, ready to love again." He led her inside, up the stairs to his room that was now their room, and closed the door gently behind them. What followed was tender and sweet, two lonely people finding comfort and joy in each other's arms. Samuel was patient and gentle, making sure Adelaide felt cherished and desired, and when she finally fell asleep curled against his chest, she knew she had made the right choice. The months that followed were the happiest of Adelaide's life. She and Samuel fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and coming together each night with growing passion and deepening love. Tommy thrived under Samuel's guidance, learning ranch skills and growing confident and strong. Sarah followed Samuel everywhere like a devoted shadow, and the sound of her laughter filled the house with joy. By autumn, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. She had thought her childbearing days were over, and the idea of bringing a new life into the world both thrilled and terrified her. When she told Samuel the news, he swept her into his arms with such fierce joy that she felt her fears melt away. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Adelaide, you have given me everything I never knew I needed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Samuel was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He insisted she rest more, hired a woman from town to help with the heavier chores, and could often be found with his hand on her growing belly, talking quietly to the child within. Tommy and Sarah were excited about the prospect of a new sibling, and the house buzzed with happy anticipation. Winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Adelaide spent her days preparing the nursery, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets while Sarah played at her feet, and Tommy helped Samuel with the winter chores. On Christmas morning, Samuel presented her with a beautiful oak cradle he had spent weeks building in secret, carved with intricate designs of horses and flowers. "It is perfect," Adelaide breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You are perfect." "No," Samuel said, pulling her close. "But with you, I am complete." The baby arrived on a cold February night in 1883, after a labor that lasted through the day and into the darkness. Samuel held Adelaide's hand throughout, murmuring encouragement and wiping her brow, refusing to leave her side despite the midwife's suggestions that he wait downstairs. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Samuel had tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," Adelaide said, exhausted but radiant as she held the baby against her chest. "What should we name him?" "Robert," Samuel said without hesitation. "After your first husband, the man who gave you Tommy and Sarah, he should be honored and remembered." Adelaide felt fresh tears spill over at his generosity, at his willingness to honor the man who had come before him. "Robert Samuel Nash," she said softly. "Our son." The baby brought new dimensions to their family. Tommy was a devoted older brother, always eager to hold the baby or fetch anything Adelaide needed. Sarah sang songs to her new brother and insisted on helping with every aspect of his care. Samuel proved to be a natural father, walking the floors with Robert when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and looking at his son with such wonder that Adelaide's heart ached with love. As spring returned to the ranch, bringing green grass and new calves, Adelaide found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. A year ago, she had been standing in a general store, prepared to sell her hair just to feed her children. Now she stood on the porch of a thriving ranch, her baby son in her arms, watching her husband teach her older children how to rope a calf. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. "Mama, Papa says I can ride Rosie by myself today." Sarah came running up the porch steps, her face flushed with excitement. "Did he now?" Adelaide smiled at her daughter. "Well, you have been practicing very hard. I suppose if Papa thinks you are ready, then you must be." Samuel approached, leading the gentle mare, and lifted Sarah into the saddle with practiced ease. He kept one hand on the horse's bridle as Sarah settled herself, her small hands gripping the saddle horn with determination. "Remember what I taught you," Samuel said. "Gentle hands, sit up straight, and Rosie will take care of the rest." Adelaide watched them walk around the corral, Samuel's voice patient and encouraging, Sarah's delighted giggles ringing out each time Rosie responded to her commands. Tommy was in the near pasture, practicing his roping on fence posts, the tip of his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Baby Robert dozed peacefully in Adelaide's arms, unaware of the beautiful life unfolding around him. That evening, after the children were in bed and the baby was sleeping in his cradle, Adelaide and Samuel sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking," Samuel said, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "The ranch is doing well, better than it ever has. I was wondering if you might want to use some of the profits to start a small business of your own. I know you are skilled with sewing, and there are plenty of ranches around here that could use someone to make curtains, quilts, and clothes." Adelaide turned to look at him in surprise. "You would support that, even with the baby and all my responsibilities here? You are more than just a mother and wife, Adelaide. You are a talented woman with skills worth sharing. Besides, Sarah is growing fast, and once Robert is a bit older, you will have more time. I want you to have something that is yours, something you can take pride in beyond this family, though God knows you should be proud of what you have done here." "How did I get so lucky?" Adelaide whispered, touching his face gently. To find you when I thought my life was over. I think we both got lucky." Samuel turned his head to kiss her palm. "I was slowly dying of loneliness out here, even if I did not realize it. You brought life and love and purpose back to this place. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, and Adelaide felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, deepest form. The years rolled forward in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Tommy grew into a tall, capable young man who could work a ranch as well as any hand Samuel hired. At 15, he was already talking about someday having his own spread, and Samuel had promised to help him get started when the time came. Sarah, at 11, was a fearless rider with a gift for training horses that amazed everyone who saw her work. She had her mother's determination and her stepfather's patience, a combination that served her well. Robert, at 6 years old, was a perfect blend of his parents, with Samuel's blue eyes and Adelaide's auburn hair. He followed his siblings around adoringly and was already learning his letters and numbers from Adelaide's patient instruction. But he was not the baby of the family anymore. That distinction belonged to 2-year-old Margaret, named after Samuel's mother, and to the new baby growing in Adelaide's belly. Due to arrive in the autumn of 1889, the ranch had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Samuel's careful management and Adelaide's tireless work had turned the Silver Creek Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the county. They had expanded their land holdings, increased their herds, and built a reputation for quality cattle and horses. Adelaide's sewing business had also flourished, and she employed 2 women from town part-time to help fill all the orders. But more than the material success, what mattered most was the love that had grown between Adelaide and Samuel. What had started as a desperate arrangement and blossomed into friendship had deepened into a love so profound that Adelaide could hardly remember life before Samuel. He was her partner in every sense, consulting her on business decisions, supporting her dreams, and loving her with a constancy that never wavered. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Adelaide with a trip to San Antonio, leaving the children in the capable care of a trusted ranch hand and his wife. It was the first time Adelaide had left the ranch for more than a day trip to town, and the experience of staying in a real hotel, eating in restaurants, and shopping in stores larger than anything Val Verde offered felt like an incredible luxury. On their last night in the city, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Samuel pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket engraved with flowers. "Open it," he urged, and Adelaide gasped when she saw the tiny photographs inside. One side held a picture of all their children, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Val Verde the previous summer. The other side held a lock of hair, auburn mixed with dark brown. "From our wedding day," Samuel explained. "A piece of you and a piece of me, joined together forever. I wanted you to have something that showed how much you mean to me, how our lives have become so intertwined that I cannot imagine one without the other." Adelaide threw her arms around his neck, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Samuel held her close, and she felt his heart beating steady and strong against hers. "I love you," she finally managed. "More than I ever thought possible to love another person." "You gave me life when I had given up hope, Samuel. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," he corrected, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "Two broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment. That is not luck, Adelaide. That is fate." The baby arrived in October, another boy they named James, who had Samuel's dark hair and Adelaide's green eyes. The birth was easier than the others, and Adelaide recovered quickly, eager to get back to the busy life of the ranch. As she watched Samuel hold his newborn son, with Tommy looking on with pride, Sarah cooing over her baby brother, Robert asking 100 questions, and little Margaret trying to climb into Samuel's lap to see, Adelaide felt her heart might burst from happiness. Time continued its steady march. The children grew and thrived. Tommy eventually married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and started building his own place on a piece of land Samuel helped him purchase. Sarah became known throughout the county for her way with horses and started training them professionally. Robert and Margaret were inseparable, always getting into mischief together, while young James toddled after them all, determined not to be left behind. Adelaide and Samuel grew older together, silver threading through their hair, laugh lines deepening around their eyes. They weathered hard winters and drought years, celebrated good harvests and successful cattle drives. They supported each other through illness and injury, through the inevitable losses that came with life and the precious joys that made it all worthwhile. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Adelaide sat on the porch swing that had become her favorite spot, watching the sun set over the land she had come to love so deeply. She was 50 now, her body showing the marks of age and childbearing, but she had never felt more beautiful. Samuel said so every day, and she believed him because she saw the truth of it in his eyes. Samuel came out to join her, moving a bit slower than he once had, but still strong and capable at 45. He settled beside her, and she leaned into his familiar warmth. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store?" Adelaide asked. "The day you changed everything." "I think about it often," Samuel admitted. "I think about how close I came to just minding my own business, to letting you sell your hair and walk out of my life forever. I thank God every day that I found the courage to speak up. I was so scared," Adelaide remembered, "terrified of what people would say, worried about trusting a stranger with my children's lives. But something in your eyes told me you were different, that you were safe." "I fell in love with you that very day," Samuel said quietly. "Watching you stand there, ready to sacrifice anything for your children. I knew you were the strongest woman I had ever met, and I wanted to spend my life at your side. And here we are, 13 years later, with 5 beautiful children and a life I never could have imagined." Adelaide turned to kiss him softly. "You bought me a future, Samuel Nash, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me love." "We gave each other love," Samuel corrected, "just as he always did. That is the magic of it, Adelaide. Neither of us was looking for it, but we found it anyway. 2 lonely people who needed each other and were brave enough to take the chance." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began their nightly vigil, Adelaide and Samuel sat together in the peace they had built, surrounded by the life they had created. Inside the house, their children's voices rang out in laughter. In the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. The creek burbled its eternal song. And on the porch of the Silver Creek Ranch, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkest moment sat hand in hand, grateful beyond words for the love they shared. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. There were grandchildren eventually, when Tommy and his wife welcomed their first child, a daughter named Adelaide after the grandmother who wept with joy at the honor. Sarah married a gentle rancher who supported her horse training dreams and never tried to dim her independent spirit. Robert followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled cattleman with a gift for breeding quality stock. Margaret surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, riding out each day to the schoolhouse, where she taught the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. Young James showed signs of becoming a veterinarian, fascinating over the health and care of animals in a way that made Samuel beam with pride. Through it all, Adelaide and Samuel remained the steady center, the foundation upon which their family was built. Their love story became something of a legend in Val Verde, the tale of the lonely rancher who had saved the desperate widow and how they had built a life of prosperity and joy together. Young women would ask Adelaide for advice about love, and she would always tell them the same thing. True love is not just passion and romance, though those have their place. True love is partnership, respect, sacrifice, and the daily choice to put someone else's happiness alongside your own. Samuel would add that sometimes love comes when you least expect it, and the key is being brave enough to reach for it, even when fear says to hold back. He never regretted approaching Adelaide that day in the store, never regretted offering her a lifeline, never regretted opening his heart to the possibility of love after years of loneliness. By 1905, Adelaide and Samuel were in their 60s, officially the elder generation now as their children raised families of their own. The Silver Creek Ranch had been divided among the children, with the main house and heart of the operation remaining with Robert, who ran it with the same skill and dedication his father had shown. Samuel still rode out most days, unable to fully retire from the work he loved, while Adelaide kept herself busy with her grandchildren, her sewing, and the garden she had tended for over 2 decades. On the evening of their 23rd wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house overflowed with children and grandchildren, ranging from Tommy's teenage daughter to James's infant son. The dinner table stretched from the dining room into the parlor, laden with food prepared by multiple generations of cooks. The noise level was tremendous, with conversations overlapping, babies crying, children laughing, and the general chaos of a large, loving family. Adelaide looked around the table, her eyes taking in each precious face, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. 23 years ago, she had been a desperate widow preparing to sell her hair. Now she was surrounded by abundance in every form that mattered. She met Samuel's eyes across the table, and he raised his glass to her with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. After dinner, when the younger children were chasing fireflies in the yard and the older ones were cleaning up inside, Adelaide and Samuel slipped away to their spot on the porch swing. Some things never changed, and this evening ritual was one of them. 23 years, Samuel mused, his arm around her shoulders. Where did the time go? Into building this. Adelaide gestured at the house full of family, at the land stretching out before them. Into creating something that will last long after we are gone. Our legacy, Samuel. Not just the ranch, but the love we have shown our children, the example of what a good marriage looks like, the foundation we have given them to build their own lives upon. I could not have done any of it without you. Samuel pulled her closer. You turned a house into a home, a lonely man into a husband and father, a piece of land into a family legacy. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, Adelaide Nash. And you are the most remarkable man, Samuel Nash. Adelaide kissed him softly. You saved my life in that general store, but you have continued saving it every day since. With your love, your partnership, your unwavering support and devotion, I am who I am today because of you. We made each other better, Samuel said. That is what true love does. It does not complete you as if you were incomplete before. It challenges you to grow, supports you in becoming your best self, and walks beside you through all of life's seasons. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them for 23 years of marriage and all the years before that led them to each other. Inside, Their children were putting grandchildren to bed in the rooms that had once been theirs. Outside, the ranch continued its eternal rhythms, cattle settling for the night, horses dozing in the barn, the creek singing its endless song. "You ever wish things had been different?" Adelaide asked suddenly. "That you had met someone younger without the baggage of children and grief?" "Never." Samuel's response was immediate and fierce. "You and your children were not baggage, Adelaide. You were a gift. Tommy and Sarah accepted me as their father and gave me the privilege of raising them. Robert, Margaret, and James are the lights of my life. And you are my whole heart. I would not change a single moment of our journey together, even the hard parts, because they all led us here." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears born of a love so deep it defied description. "I feel the same way. Even losing Robert was part of the path that led me to you. I will always love him for giving me Tommy and Sarah, for the good years we had together. But Samuel, you gave me a second chance at life, at love, at happiness. You showed me that the human heart has an infinite capacity for love, that opening yourself to someone new does not diminish what came before. Your heart is the biggest I have ever known," Samuel said, wiping her tears gently. "Big enough to hold your first husband's memory, our 5 children, all those grandchildren in there, me, and probably half the county besides. It is one of the things I love most about you." As the night deepened and the house finally grew quiet, Adelaide and Samuel remained on the porch, holding each other and watching the stars wheel overhead. They had been doing this for 23 years, and God willing, they would do it for many more. But whether they had 1 year or 20 left together, Adelaide knew they had already lived a love story for the ages. The following years brought the inevitable changes of aging. Samuel's joints grew stiffer, and he finally had to admit he could no longer work the ranch as he once had. Adelaide's eyesight dimmed, making her intricate sewing more difficult, though she refused to give it up entirely. They slowed down together, their world contracting slightly but no less rich for the smaller scale. Robert and his wife moved into the main house to care for them. Insisting it was the least they could do after all Samuel and Adelaide had done for the family. The other children visited frequently, bringing grandchildren who would climb into Adelaide's lap for stories, or follow Samuel out to the barn to hear tales of the old days. On a spring morning in 1912, Adelaide woke to find Samuel standing at the window of their bedroom, watching the sunrise paint the sky with color. At 62, he was still handsome to her eyes, still the man who had offered her hope when she had none. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "About how every sunrise feels like a gift now," Samuel said, taking her hand. "About how grateful I am for every day I get to spend with you. About how our story could have ended so differently if I had not found the courage to speak up that day in the store." "But you did speak up," Adelaide reminded him. "You were brave, and that bravery changed everything, not just for me and my children, but for you too. You told me once that you were lonely before we came, that the ranch felt empty. Do you still feel that way?" "Never." Samuel pulled her into his arms, and Adelaide rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "This house is full of love, full of life, full of everything that matters. You filled all the empty spaces, Adelaide, and I will never be able to thank you enough for saying yes to my proposal, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher with more land than sense." "You had plenty of sense," Adelaide laughed. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You saw a woman in need and offered her dignity along with help. You gave me work, not charity, and in doing so you gave me back my self-respect. That was wisdom, Samuel, not just kindness." They stood together at the window, watching the day begin, and Adelaide felt such profound contentment that it seemed to fill her from the inside out. This was what happy ever after looked like, she realized. Not a perfect life without trouble or sorrow, but a life built on love strong enough to weather any storm. A partnership that grew deeper with each passing year. A family that would carry on their legacy of love long after they were gone. The seasons continued their eternal dance, and Adelaide and Samuel danced with them, moving more slowly now but no less gracefully for the measured pace. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the family tree they had planted together bearing abundant fruit. As the years passed into the 1910s, both Adelaide and Samuel's health began to decline in the way of all mortal beings. But they faced aging together with the same partnership that had characterized their marriage from the beginning. When Samuel fell ill with pneumonia one harsh winter, Adelaide nursed him back to health with fierce determination. When Adelaide broke her hip, Samuel sat beside her bed every day, reading to her and holding her hand through the pain. They had long conversations during this time about death and what came after, about their faith and their hopes. Samuel told Adelaide that he believed their souls were so intertwined now that death could not truly separate them. Adelaide agreed, saying she felt the same way, that even if one of them passed first, the other would carry them in their heart until they were reunited. "I am not afraid of dying," Samuel said one evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "I have lived a good life, a full life because of you. If the Lord called me home tomorrow, I would go peacefully, knowing I was blessed beyond measure." "Do not talk like that," Adelaide protested, though she knew such conversations were necessary. "I need you here, Samuel Nash. I need your hand in mine, your voice in my ear, your love surrounding me." "And I need yours," Samuel replied. "Which is why I have been praying that when our time comes, we go together, or at least close enough together that neither of us has to be alone for too long." Adelaide leaned against him, and they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land stretched out before them, the land they had worked and loved and built their life upon. In the distance, cattle grazed. Closer to the house, grandchildren played in the yard. Inside, family moved about, preparing dinner, settling babies, living the life that Adelaide and Samuel had made possible. "You remember that first night after we were married?" Adelaide asked softly. "How nervous I was, how gentle you were." "I remember everything," Samuel said. "Every moment with you is etched in my memory like words carved in stone. The first time I saw you in the store, the first time you smiled at me, the first time you said you loved me, the births of our children. Every sunrise we have watched together, every sunset, every ordinary day that was extraordinary because we spent it together. I love you, Samuel Nash." Adelaide turned to kiss him, and despite their age, despite the aches and pains of bodies wearing out, the kiss held all the passion and devotion of their wedding day. "And I love you, Adelaide Nash, now and forever." The years granted them 5 more peaceful seasons together, a gift they never took for granted. They spent those years surrounded by family, watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive, tending the garden, sitting on the porch, and loving each other with the quiet intensity of 2 souls perfectly matched. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning in 1918, with Adelaide holding his hand. He was 68 years old and had lived to see the Silver Creek Ranch become one of the most successful family operations in Texas. But more than that, he had lived to see his children and grandchildren thriving, carrying forward the values he and Adelaide had instilled. He died knowing he was loved, that his life had mattered, that he had made a difference. Adelaide grieved deeply but without bitterness. She had been given 36 years with Samuel, decades more than she had dared hope for that desperate day in the general store. She continued living at the ranch, surrounded by family who loved her, finding comfort in the routines Samuel had loved, the land he had cherished, the legacy they had built together. She would sit on the porch swing each evening, and her children swore they could see her talking to someone invisible, smiling at empty air. When they asked about it, Adelaide would just smile mysteriously and say that Samuel was not really gone, that she felt him with her always, that love like theirs did not end just because one of them had moved to the next life. Adelaide lived for 3 more years, years she spent writing down the story of her and Samuel's love for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wanted them to know how it all began, how a desperate widow and a lonely rancher had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from their broken pieces. She passed away peacefully in her sleep on a summer evening in 1921, 76 years old and surrounded by family. Her children found her with a smile on her face, one hand extended as if reaching for someone, and they knew she had gone to join Samuel at last. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of an oak tree they had planted together their first year of marriage. The headstone read, "Adelaide Vaughn Nash, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she turned survival into a life worth living. 1855–1921. Next to it, Samuel's headstone proclaimed, "Samuel Nash, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he gave a widow and her children a future." 1850–1918. But those who knew the real story understood that the headstones only told half the truth. Samuel had not just given Adelaide a future. He had given her love, partnership, respect, and joy. And Adelaide had not just been saved by Samuel. She had saved him right back, filling his lonely life with warmth and purpose and family. Their children kept the Silver Creek Ranch running, passing it down through the generations along with the story of how it all began. It became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays, about the day a lonely rancher walked into a general store and saw a desperate widow preparing to sell her hair, and how he offered her something far more valuable than money. He offered her a future, yes, but even more importantly, he offered her his heart. And she, brave and strong and willing to take one more chance on life, had accepted. From that single act of courage and kindness grew a love that shaped generations, a family that thrived, and a legacy that endured long after both of them had passed from this earth into whatever adventure awaited them beyond. The story of Samuel and Adelaide Nash became more than just a family tale. It became a testament to the power of second chances, to the courage it takes to open your heart after loss, to the magic that can happen when two lonely souls find each other at exactly the right moment. It reminded people that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness can change everything, and that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start not with passion, but with compassion and grow into something neither person could have imagined. Years turned into decades, and the 20th century rolled forward with all its changes and challenges. The Silver Creek Ranch adapted and thrived, surviving economic depressions and world wars, droughts and floods, always held together by the strong foundation Samuel and Adelaide had laid. Each generation that took over the ranch would visit the graves on the hill, paying respects and drawing strength from the love story that had started it all. Grandchildren who had known Adelaide and Samuel told their own grandchildren about them, keeping the memories alive. They spoke of how Samuel would look at Adelaide even after decades of marriage, as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. They remembered how Adelaide would light up when Samuel came in from the range, no matter how tired she was. They recalled the way the two of them would sit on the porch swing each evening, hand in hand, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love. The old general store in Val Verde where it all began eventually closed down, replaced by more modern establishments, but a historical marker was placed on the site commemorating it as the place where one of the town's most beloved love stories had begun. Tour guides would tell visitors about the widow who was going to sell her hair to buy food, and the lonely rancher who bought her a future instead, and how their love had shaped the community in ways both large and small. Because that was the real legacy of Samuel and Adelaide Nash, not just the successful ranch or the children and grandchildren they had produced, but the example they had set of what love could be. They showed that love did not have to be complicated or dramatic to be profound. That sometimes the greatest romances are built on simple kindness, daily choices, and the commitment to weather life's storms together. They proved that it was possible to love again after loss, that opening your heart to someone new did not betray the memory of those who came before. They demonstrated that true partnership meant supporting each other's dreams, respecting each other's strengths, and covering each other's weaknesses. They lived out the truth that love was not just a feeling but an action, a daily choice to put someone else's happiness alongside your own. And perhaps most importantly, they showed that love was worth the risk. Samuel had risked rejection and embarrassment when he approached Adelaide in that store. Adelaide had risked trusting a stranger with her children's lives and her own heart. But both had been brave enough to take the chance, and that courage had rewarded them with decades of happiness and a love that lasted beyond the grave. The porch swing where they had spent so many evenings was eventually replaced, and that replacement was replaced in turn, but there was always a swing on the porch of the main house at Silver Creek Ranch. Family members would sit there in the evenings, watching the same sunsets Adelaide and Samuel had watched, feeling the same peace they must have felt, and remembering that everything around them, all the abundance and love and family, had started with one man's courage and one woman's willingness to hope again. The story of the widow who was selling her hair to buy food, and the lonely rancher who bought her a future instead, became a part of Texas folklore, told alongside tales of cattle drives and frontier justice, a reminder that not all Western stories were about gunfights and outlaws. Some were about quiet courage, deep love, and the everyday heroism of building a life together against the odds. And so the legacy lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the enduring power of love and the truth that sometimes, when we least expect it, life gives us a second chance. All we have to do is be brave enough to take it, just as Adelaide and Samuel had done on that fateful day in Val Verde, when a desperate widow met a lonely rancher, and both of their lives changed forever, for the better and for always.